our webinar today, those of you who attended some of our webinars in the spring on distance learning know that we titled them Distance Learning Ideas from the Field. We really appreciate those of you who came to those. We got such a good response, we decided to kind of continue those webinars in the fall. So our plan is to organizationally offer webinars every week as much as we can. And one part of those webinars, a couple of times a month, maybe 3, will be a set of webinars called Ideas from the Field. And what we are trying to do is maintain that same kind of structure that we had in the spring of having somebody from one of our programs in the field do a presentation, 20 to 30 minutes, and then allow a lot of time for you folks to ask questions. We found that that was kind of 2 things about that structure was really helpful. One, it was helpful to hear from somebody that's actually doing the work, so it's not theory, it's very practical, and you get kind of the real nitty-gritty about how something is implemented. And then the other is the opportunity to ask questions so you can really get the information you need to be able to implement the ideas that you're hearing about. And so we're still kind of at this point focusing on issues around distance education and distance learning. We're going to do some strategies around reopening as well. And as we move on, and if things ever get back to normal, we'll wind up expanding these to other types of instructional or program management topics. For those of you who are wondering, we are recording this webinar. Everyone who attends, or even folks that signed up, will get a follow-up email on Monday. It'll have a webinar recording. It'll have Michael's PowerPoint. We'll have a summary of the information. We've been trying to put together a what we call kind of an infographic, but it's really just a nicely organized information sheet of key points that are talked about during the webinar and lists of resources. So if you want to share that information with your colleagues in your literacy program, it gives you a good, kind of nice, easy thing to share around. We'll also include links to the chat transcript, which I know a lot of people find valuable, the Q&A transcript, and a link to a certificate that you can download and print out. We're going to ask that during the webinar today that you communicate with us through 2 avenues. The chat is kind of a wide open opportunity for you to communicate with us and others attending the webinar. You'll see a lot of people are already kind of introducing themselves. So if this is a place where we'll post links while Michael is talking, so you can kind of, if he mentions resources, we'll post them there and you can kind of go and explore while he's talking about them. But we're going to ask any questions, any content questions for Michael, that you put them in the Q&A functionality, that you use that to ask questions. It just helps us track those questions and make sure that all the questions get answered. What we tend to do is go to the top of the hour. We'll ask you to stop asking questions. We, we'll end the webinar officially, but Michael's agreed to kind of stick around and make sure everybody's questions get answered. So if you get a question in the Q&A, we'll make sure it gets answered. And even if you can't stick around to hear that answer, it'll be on the recording. Last thing, you'll see a web address, proliteracy.org/webinars. If you go to that website, you'll see our webinar calendar. It has all of the webinars that we are offering as an organization. You'll see just kind of general webinars like these Ideas for the Field. You'll see webinars from New Readers Press, and you'll see webinars from our membership department that are just for members. We'll have the descriptions as much as we can. We've got them scheduled out through November and some into December. So as you kind of move out in the calendar, the descriptions might be less specific because people are still kind of working on those presentations. But you can go there and see what we have coming up. We'll try to put the links to register in those descriptions on the calendar, usually about 1 or 2 weeks out. But also, because you're attending this webinar, you'll be on our email list and we'll get notifications whenever we have a new webinar available for you to register. Also on that website, you can see links to our previous webinars, both the distance learning ones from the spring, as well as some of the webinars from New Readers Press. So that's kind of all of the information I have, the logistics, the boring part of the webinar. And now I'm going to turn things over to Michael Evans. For those of you who don't know Michael Evans, he's the Executive Director of Kalamazoo Literacy Council. And I got to tell you, I've worked with Michael on a couple of different projects, and they're just doing some fantastic things there in Kalamazoo. And he's going to tell you about kind of one of their initiatives and really how they have dealt with this COVID situation and how they've worked to bring students on and be able to provide instruction for them and support their tutors through virtual learning. So Michael, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you should be able to share yours.
Well, thank you very much, Todd. I'll share my screen momentarily. Thank you very much for inviting me. So, good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, I am Michael Evans, the Executive Director for the Kalamazoo Literacy Council. I've been in this role for the past 10 years and loving every day of it because it's an opportunity to be able to help adults be able to reach their goals through the literacy services that we provide. Today's topic are exploring some of the navigation strategies we are using to bridge the digital divide. So before we get into the actual things that we're going to discuss today, I wanted to just give you a little idea of what our Literacy Council is. And I'm describing it in kind of its current state because everything that we're doing right now as far as instruction, or the vast majority of what we're doing, is through something we call our Kalamazoo Literacy Council Virtual Learning Center, where we're providing services anytime, anywhere, any way, through their virtual classes, online tutoring, and a variety of web-based instruction. We do have 3 different types of programs that we have underneath the Kalamazoo Literacy Council banner. We have an adult tutoring program that is primarily volunteer driven, and it has about 366 learners in it. That's much larger when you count those who are not active, but that's how many we have. Adult basic education program that is purposefully small but mighty. We work with our area adult education providers. Our job is to get them proficient to transition to other adult education programs where they can get on the path to finishing their GED or other things. And we have an ESL program with about 124 learners in it, where they are coming from all over the globe. It's like the United Nations for us, and we are very pleased to have them. Our current project is to transition as many of them into our virtual learning center, and we've been successful in getting 170 of them being able to predictably and on a consistent basis engage in services. And we do this with a mighty but small staff of 6 people, including 3 navigators. And that's what we're going to be speaking about a lot, are the incredible navigators we have to remove barriers to services. We have 199 volunteers that have signed up over many years, and their whole purpose is to be able to work one-on-one, lead some small groups, and occasionally teach classes. And we're supported by 3 ESL instructors who provide the instruction that we have. Within the literacy center that we have in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is located on the southwest Michigan part of the map. So if you took the mitten going to the southwest region, that's where we're at. We have all of these different instruction services that are provided for our learners virtually. So we have 4 levels of ESL, a TOEFL class, citizenship, which is taught by probably one of the coolest volunteer tutors you can ever find, conversational English and web-based programming through Burlington English, health literacy classes focusing on COVID-19 and SNAP education programs, nutrition programs, a really good program. Our Expressways to Success is our ABE program, transitioning people to our local ABE or adult ed providers. A jobs class, a digital literacy class that is using Learning Upgrade as the backbone for providing those digital services. and a parent literacy program that's helping our parents to be more proficient first teachers at home to their children. You know, many of our parents are in that current circumstance. And we also have a writing class that is led by a wonderful volunteer. So collectively, we are capable of serving over 500 people, and we're currently moving everyone that has the interest of continuing to learning into our virtual services. So today we're going to talk about 5 things we're hoping to be able to learn in the short amount of time that we have. And I apologize for going quickly, but if we don't, you won't get to all of it. First, we want to talk about how to build the navigation capacity within your program to address the digital divide. What we mean by navigation capacity is that system of supports that help to remove barriers to learning for our learners and to create bondings and relationships in our community to be able to get them to get involved in that process. We are going to address or talk about how to address some of the technical barriers associated with bridging the digital divide, some of the instructional barriers associated with bridging the digital divide, and the part that I think that oftentimes is not spoken about as much as what we call the engagement barriers, how to get our learners to be much more proficient and supported where they feel that they have the ability to persist in this virtual environment. And finally, how to establish a laptop loaning program. Regardless of the size of your organization, there's the ability to be able to start. So first thing is, we know when COVID-19 hit, it changed everything. And the digital divide became the most prominent barrier that we had. There are obviously traditional barriers to learning that we've always had to address, but the digital divide became the most prominent. We kind of found out that if you couldn't get past the technology, you couldn't get to the learning. So the idea that there is a digital divide, this uneven distribution of access, use, and impact for information and community technologies really disproportionately hit our learning population. And in most communities, addressing the digital divide was from the framework of children who are engaged in learning and not so much for the parents or the adults who need that same system of support. So we considered ourselves to be one of those populations, that distinct groups that is on the other side of the digital divide. And we endeavored to be able to have some strategies to be able to comprehensively address and overcome those barriers. So what we did early on in the process is, as we were quickly terraforming our tutoring services, which were all in person across 15 different literacy centers, 30 different individual sites, moving them over into a virtual environment, we also worked with some local partners to form a task force to come up with some recommendations of how to support specifically the adult learners that we were working with. And that was to shift the emphasis, or at least to include in this discussion, the adult learners who were using the same system of virtual supports that we see in our K-12 and in higher education. So there was a lot of conversation about how college students were going to get back to school and how K-12 students, but what about our adult ed? Locally, we felt that we needed to have some shape or form for it. So our task force, they were tasked with proposing strategies to address it. They were looking at it systemically, so it's the digital devices, the learning platforms, the training, supports, partners, and the policies required to build a vibrant learning system that can effectively bridge the digital divide. So we do have an actual task force report, and I'll make sure that that's included as well. We're not going to go through all of that today because that's not the primary focus, but I wanted to present the context for where we were thinking about this. The idea was not to solve this as a literacy council. We're all volunteer-led with a few staff to support it, but to engage the community to do its best to help us bridge this very difficult to bridge challenge. So the recommendations that they had is to look at the digital divide from 3 different perspectives. The obvious ones are the technical barriers, the software, hardware, and internet that you need in order to be able to consistently connect learners to services. The second one are the instruction barriers, and that's making sure that once connection is provided, that access to a range of academic options and having people who can teach it well, and having supports that can make sure that we are getting the learning outcomes that we were in an in-person environment existed. So what we saw is that there were a lot of tutors and instructors who were great in person, but without some supports, they were not capable or willing to teach in a virtual environment. And if you want to be able to remove the barrier, you need to have someone who is going to be available to teach. And that was the tutors and the instructors that we had in our region that were having difficulty connecting. So that was the second barrier that we needed to address. And the third is those engagement barriers. And I can't emphasize enough that this was one of the areas that we thought about the most, because we didn't see this primarily as an information technology problem. When you talk to IT people, they use a different language than most of us have difficulty understanding. So to lead with that with English language learners or adults with lower literacy skills or learning differences, probably not the best way to do that. And what do they want to hear from us? They want to hear that it's going to be okay, you can learn, and we will be with you every step of the way. So we're looking more at the social emotional well-being of the learners, building trust with them, and removing the distractions that they might have in their lives so that they can have the coping skills necessary to persist in virtual learning. So there's three quick tips in each area. We don't have time to go through everything that we've learned, but we can tell you some things. And the first one was looking at the technology parts, the technical parts. And again, until you get past the technology, you can't get to the learning. So the first thing that you can do, or at least what we did, and we strongly suggest that you start thinking about this, is establish some criteria for using existing and loaned digital devices. Existing because these laptops and desktop computers and all of these tablets, they're already out there, but they haven't been tasked toward your learning if you haven't been able to bring them into your fleet. So we were looking at the computer labs that were dormant. Do you have laptops that you can use? In our case, we had several literacy centers that we had equipped with laptops that were sitting there dormant because of COVID-19. Can we bring those in and repurpose them? Most of our learners have smartphones. Can we use those as quality learning devices? There's tablets, and many of them have desktops and other things at home. So let's look at the existing inventory first, and then look at maybe purchasing new computers or getting other computers from partners who already have that capacity. Some of our corporations, they're donating laptops. We say, make sure you donate the right ones, the ones with cameras, not the ones that from 10 years ago that are not helpful. But the point is establish the criteria so you know what you want, know what you have, and know what you want, and let your community know about it. They will respond. When you are making purchases to address this, try to purchase similar models. This is going to limit the variety of questions that you have that are specific to IT. Our navigators and tutors and instructors, they are not IT specialists, nor do we want them to become that. That will suck the passion out of them quicker than anything else. So try to do some things to make it simple. If you're using similar models, you're going to have similar problems, more predictable challenges, and that means we can have common solutions instead of an ever-growing array of different things that we are likely to encounter. And finally, for every model that you have and everything that you see, create visual guides so that we have a much more clear and concise way of coaching learners and volunteers into proficiency. So as an example of what we're talking about, starts with what we started with the laptop loaning program. Remember, we were looking at the existing laptops, so we pulled all of our laptops that we had sitting dormant, and we kind of reminded ourselves of what we are to our community. When there was an emergency fund in our community that was called the Disaster Relief Fund, and they were trying to find those essential services, and we said, hello, we are an essential service, and I would submit that every one of you are. And we said, can you give us just a little bit of funds so we can purchase the new things to join with our existing things? And they did. And they did this because they knew that with us, we can use those same devices that we're using for education, for completing unemployment applications, connecting learners to community resources that they currently need or that they were needing at the time, employment, food, childcare, financial needs, housing, and so on. We were showing people how to complete the census. You can do that online, and that was what we were doing. And finally, our main incentive was to connect learners to the classes and tutoring services that we had through our virtual learning center. So what ended up happening is we were able to get 40 laptops, not with the 5,000. These were those that we claimed, and we were able to repurpose some funds from our annual budget to get 40 laptops sent, and to be able to connect 170 adult learners with the existing digital infrastructure that was out there. That was a coordinated process, and we'll show you some of the things that helped. But the first thing was to establish that. The way we got these laptops out is we were able to purchase them. We have some help from some local volunteer interns from the Western Michigan University. They have some great computer science students. There's one in particular who dedicated his time exclusively for outfitting these laptops. He also happens to be my incredible son, but he has a team of people he's recruiting for our next phase to do this for free. So we didn't have to spend extra money other than getting the laptops and putting them in the hands of someone who can help to make them so that they are uniform and we can use them more easily. Visual guides. Now we have navigators, and these are the people who we have hired who are to remove barriers to learning. The digital divide is the biggest barrier to learning, and visual guides is one of the things that would happen first. So we would send a laptop, usually through the mail. Me and the post office, we're on a first name basis. They know me by whatever mask I'm wearing because I go in on a pretty frequent basis. I have 3 more laptops going out tomorrow. It would go out today, but I'm here with you. But the visual guide goes along with it. And there's an expectation that when you get this laptop that we are sending, you're going to get a phone call to walk you through this visual guide. So here's an example of one of them. And it comes in just like this. Your password is read. Then you get a phone call, and we're going to walk you through it. So when you're doing this, make sure you use a common password. I know that you're going to hear some IT specialists that say, but what about security? It's not about security today. It's about access. So when you have all these different random passwords, that makes it much more difficult for you to be able to manage. Use a common password. Trust me, it saves you a lot of time and grief. Use consistent naming conventions for usernames. So we use the first initial of your name and your last name with your birthday. So yeah, I am older, 12/22/68. So if you know me and your birth date, you should be able to have your username. And that makes it so that you don't have to keep on looking up passwords and have some secret encrypted document that you keep on losing and forget to update. Just what is your name? What is your birthday? And use that across as many platforms as possible. So we use this for Plato, Burlington English, everything else that we're using. We try to keep those same naming conventions. And here is the thing that will save a lot of grief. There's this thing called TeamViewer, and it is free. You download it onto the laptops that you have purchased before you sent them out. And what this thing allows you to do is to take control over the laptop once it connects to the internet. So for those learners that have lower language fluency and you're struggling, you could just say, let me take over the computer, set it up, and then teach you how to use it. TeamViewer, free. Those computer science and science students who help us with the reconfiguring, free. The only thing that we're asking for is our community to help us have the number of laptops necessary to make it work for us. When you are building a visual guide, make sure that you show them exactly what they're seeing. So this is what our home screen looks like. We took everything off of it on purpose, with the exception of what you're likely to use. Use a consistent setup. So every laptop we open, this is what it looks like, or as close as we can for it. And my son, he is very particular about making sure that this little reverse L shape happens because it's a little bit easier to be able to do consistently. Make sure it's done consistently so you don't have to say, well, click on the right side, and then they say it's not on the right side, or click on the left side in this case. This is the more struggle part, is connecting them to the internet. So we have this little button and we say, you need to click here, and this is where you have the most patient conversation possible to be able to get that Wi-Fi passcode. Once they get past this, you can take over with TeamViewer. Until you do this, it is you on the phone or our navigator on the phone saying, we need to get you to put your Wi-Fi password so we can get connected. At the end of the call, we're hoping to be able to go from talking on the phone to seeing you in person. We do also loan hotspots out when necessary, so they will have a hotspot password, and we provide that and coach them through it. Once we get over that hurdle, show them everything that's on their desktop, because they're going to ask questions, or at least they're going to click in error, and that will make it so that it's more difficult for them to log into classes or to take advantage of what they currently have. So these are the different things that we're using. We have WebEx and we have Zoom, TeamViewer, and all of these other things. But the whole point is to explain every icon in this call. So you're talking with them and you're just walking them through it. This is where you go for Plato. This is where your English practice lessons are, and so on. So it is a step-by-step process. And I can tell you, the thing that has given our learners the most confidence is hearing this sentence: we will be with you every step of the way. And this is what we mean as every step of the way. We do take screenshots of every action that is likely to happen from the time you open that laptop. You want to get on WebEx, first click here, and it shows what's going to happen next. And make sure that your visual guide includes all those steps, because when it doesn't have one, your learner's going to get kind of distressed saying, I'm not seeing what you're telling me I'm supposed to see. So take the time to screenshot everything, put it in the guide, and send it along with the device. And you continue to do that against every step. And then you have your preview screen. Now this is Taylor Sayers. She is our latest navigator. She's a parent literacy navigator working with our parents, but she was an intern with us before that and performed so well, we just had to continue to have her. She teaches our parent literacy together classes, but it shows you every button that the learner is likely to do. So use it for the microphones and the cameras, and press here to start the class. Once they do that, you're talking face to face. And when they do, there's usually some kind of a happy dance. I'm not going to demonstrate it, nor could you see it anyway, so that's not likely to happen. But there's a great amount of joy once this happened, and they've done this about 170 times. So I think I'll go back to the previous one. What you really also need to do is once you are in this system and you're talking face to face, now you spend time practicing every button they are likely to use. And we read this with them, we make sure that they understand every button, and then most importantly, you practice. If the only time you are talking with learners is during class time, you're going to find that they're not showing up at class time because they're forgetting things or struggling with things. So practice sessions are really great just to be able to check on them so that they can become more proficient in how they use these devices that you have loaned them. So that's one idea, is building your laptop loaning program, visual guides, and training people to be able to walk every step of the way for every device. And when I say every device, we have this for PCs first. Now we're doing it for Macs and Androids, iPads, Chromebooks. We kind of found out Chromebooks are a little bit challenging, but we're getting through it. So there's a visual guide that's customized to every device. And YouTube is great, but it's not customized to use. So do the hard work. It took about 15 minutes to do the first draft of this, and then we started to make it a little bit more user-friendly. But if you do this work, it saves you time, and it saves you a lot of grief. And it reduces the number of tiers that you're likely to have. So quick tips when it comes to removing those instructional barriers. One of the things we find is if you don't have a tutor to teach, then you have a learner who still is disconnected despite them being connected past the technology. So the first thing is you have to create opportunities for instructors and students to learn how to teach and learn in the virtual environment. These are spaces that are not really academic oriented. They're more about social and getting to learn the tools. So every other week, we have what we call tutor checkups. You sign up virtually and you get to learn how to be a virtual tutor, talk to other tutors, learn the good, bad, and ugly. And the further along we're going with this, we're hearing a lot more good than bad and ugly, but we still address those things as well. Train instructors and tutors in the 7 skills necessary to be a proficient virtual tutor. They have these 7 skills, then you're not always answering questions or getting phone calls and emails about things that they should already know. And digitize common learning texts that they are using. Tutors want to go back to what they were doing as opposed to always having to learn something that's brand new. Like, yeah, now you can work with your student on Khan Academy. Well, they weren't doing that. If they were using, say, New Readers Press products like Challenger or Laubach Way to Reading or whatever, digitize those. But make sure you're observing the copyright restrictions. We do this, we digitize one book, but we still mail the books to our learners to make sure that they have that. I know that Todd, we talked about this a little bit beforehand, and he agreed that we were doing this appropriately. So we will continue to do that as a practice. And boy, does it save time from having tutors holding up their books to the camera and expecting their learners to know how to see it.
Yeah, and Michael, if I can jump in here real quick and just kind of give people a good rule of thumb is that if you are copying something to make it easier for you to use, such as Michael was saying, his tutor is digitizing a copy of the student book so they can easily display it on the screen as opposed to holding it up. That is generally okay, not going to get you into copyright problems. If you are copying a book so that you don't have to buy a book, so if you were copying those pages and then emailing them to your learners so you didn't have to purchase a book for your learners and mail that, that's not good. That is a violation. So just kind of, that's an easy rule of thumb and kind of good guidance for when you should be okay and when you actually are violating the spirit of the copyright restrictions.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Todd. That is exactly what we do. And when we digitize, I'm doing this work along with a couple of volunteers and a partner in the building that we're in. And we just scan the chapter by chapter, not the whole book because that's too cumbersome, but chapter by chapter and put them into a filing system so it's easy to find the lesson that you have, what you're working with your learners. So we have a library of these books, and we are training our tutors to be proficient, our instructors to be proficient, so that they don't have to. Because remember, they're at home, and their scanning devices look like, well, not what you have in the office. So we feel that that's our job to do that, to equip them properly. Once you have the documents in place, and I say the common learning text, if you scan everything, that's overkill, and you probably don't have the time to do it, but scan the things that they need first and most, then start working on training volunteers and instructors on the 7 skills to be a proficient virtual tutor. I tried to get it down to 5, but at the end of the day, 7 ended up being what it's like, so here they are. 1, they should be able to locate PDF instruction documents on their computer. When we work with our tutors, we'll say, here's where you save your files for the books that you're teaching off of, and they should be able to locate and use them effectively. If they can't, then they're going to be calling you. Be able to click, and we use WebEx a lot, but also Zoom. They should be able to enter into their tutoring sessions. We're setting it up now. Right now, you could do it any way that you want to, but we're actually setting up a virtual room set up so that they don't have to schedule them all, and they can just say, I'd like to reserve a tutoring session, so we can do that. But they should know how to enter their session independently, be able to turn the camera and microphone on. How many times have you seen people who are still on mute or you can't see them? So they should be able to do that independently, share and stop sharing their screen, which we've been doing today. And most people who are on this call, if you got to this call, these things you already know, so you're almost there. Be able to use the annotate tools. That's where you're able to click on arrows and circle things and highlight things. That makes it so that it's a lot easier once you have those digital texts in place. And be able to print, screen, and paste into a document when you are checking homework or you need to be able to do so. Or you hit the print screen button for PCs, and for Mac users, you have to hit 2 buttons. It's a Command P, but we teach that. And be able to attach and email documents for your learner. And if you're working with a literacy council or an adult ed, you can send your progress to them. So we spend every other week talking about these skills, and we're actually creating a badge that will make you into a virtual tutor if you can demonstrate these 7 skills. Now, the funny thing about it is once they see that they have these skills, now our tutors become much more confident and they're willing to lean into this, as opposed to saying, nope, I will never be a tutor until in-person is going to happen. And who knows when that will happen. So these 7 skills, we do this every other week in a virtual environment called our tutor checkups. The final part are 3 tips quickly in the engagement barriers. And this again is looking at the person instead of the technology. So the things that we look for are training navigators, and these are people who we've hired to remove barriers and connect people to community resources, and your staff and your tutors, whoever is connecting the learners, train them to look at the unique challenges of bridging the digital divide for adult learners. It wasn't what was before COVID-19 that you're talking about. It's the new barriers. So what are they using digital devices for today? Is it to access all of the services that they used to get in person when they were walking into a lobby at Michigan Works? Well, now they have to do that all virtually. And if they can't, then they're going to be behind. Is it to be able to remove any food insecurities and schedule appointments for food pantries? It's all virtual now. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on the new challenges as opposed to exclusively those previous challenges before COVID. Connect learners to community resources that help remove distractions and address other needs in their lives. Those needs didn't go away. If anything, they got accentuated once COVID-19 hit. So if they're still thinking about where's my food going to come from, I don't have my unemployment application in, and all those other distractions, they won't be present enough to work with you, even though you have removed the digital divide, given them a tutor or a classroom, and they still are going to be distracted and not be able to work with you. And so what we have are what we call empowerment groups or success groups that are not academic. They're more social to give learners a safe space to talk about their needs. We have great partnership with Western Michigan University, and what they do, what they've provided with us are social work interns or interdisciplinary interns, and they're doing a lot of this work, just getting together to find out what you need to be successful. We even had for one of our greatest volunteers, his name is Jay, and he's teaching a citizenship class. He had his 80th birthday, and we had a virtual birthday party. Non-academic, but you're still practicing all those skills to build community and feel like you belong to something and that you feel supported and safe. Our parent literacy classes, they have these evening classes, and all they're doing is talking about how to be more proficient as a parent in this time. So creating this system helps. We look at our learners and the needs that they have with our navigators with what we call our circle of support. So our learners, they have other needs: transportation needs, health needs, employment needs, education needs, childcare needs, financial needs, housing needs. And our navigators who we've hired and we've trained, and these could be instructors, these could even be tutors, we call them friendly connectors, they could be a part of this system, is understanding what these resources are and how to connect to those resources in ways that reduce the strain on our learners. So we have 3 tiers of navigation training. So our highest tier is tier 3. We have a few of them who can do all of these things. But what happened afterwards is all of these existing barriers and existing resources, you can't get through them until you get through the digital divide. So here's the new things that we're training on and that we would encourage you as you're building your navigation system to start with. Maybe consider adding translation services. I don't care what anyone says, talking technology in a different language is really difficult. So we say if we can use translation services to talk about these technical things in your native language, that's great. And we have some peer mentors who are students who are fluent enough in English, and they have volunteered their time to be able to help with some of these. And our navigator, we have an ESL navigator, her name is Jackie, she's awesome, that takes liberal use of these services. Work on those visual guides for everything you encounter and build the library up so that it's available. And if you're working with other community partners, instead of them building the same thing, why don't we spread that around so that one agency can focus on one thing and we can focus on another thing. And eventually we will have all of the guides necessary to be able to bridge this divide much more efficiently without duplicating effort. And digital devices, looking at what those digital devices are. We have in our community, there's an effort called Digital Access for All, where Kalamazoo Public Schools, our largest public school system, they've made a commitment of equipping for KPS, or Kalamazoo Public Schools children, 1,000 households with Chromebooks and hotspots. And the Chromebooks are not necessarily great for us, but the hotspots are. So if we know where they are, we know we can bring our digital devices in and know that they have Wi-Fi, so we don't have to build what they already have. So knowing what that new infrastructure looks like and letting them know who are building it that you need to consider our parents, our learners, that helps. We also were able to get commitments from them. They're going to be able to answer many of our IT calls for free. I love free. And finally, learning aids, that for our learners who are learning at home, it might be different. And it's not so much notebooks so much, though they still need those. We found that if you have these little wipe-on, wipe-off boards and you hold them up to those cameras, it's a lot easier to be able to see what their writing is and for them to write questions if they are wanting to. We teach them how to use the chats functions and everything else, but helping learners to be able to be proficient with those learning aids helps. So those are 3 areas: the technical, the instructional, and the engagement barriers, with 3 tips each. And within a short amount of time, I hope that gave you at least a start of how to be able to build this. And these things, they work for any organization of any size. You just have to decide where you start. If you have even just 3 laptops that you can find or to start with, you can start a laptop loaning program and invite the community to add to it. If you have tutors, even one of them who's willing to be a virtual tutor, where there's one, there's more. So build a group so that they can be supported and learn those 7 skills. And if you have people who are working and in partnership with other programs, maybe they can help with the scanning. Your libraries are great for this, and other program partners are great for this, so that you have a navigation system that is more capable of supporting adult learners in your community. With that, I'll take any questions that you have, and thank you so much for the time that I've been allowed.
Great, thank you, Michael. We've got a few questions and a few more that are coming in, but actually I have a question of my own, so I'm going to assume my prerogative as the pro literacy host to ask it first. So you talked about how the You had an initiative in your community to get 1,000 Chromebooks and hotspots out in the community. Did you, and you talked about the importance of having your technology work the same way for everybody so that it had the same password and the same, it was the same computer, the same password, the same things loaded on the home screen. Did you work with the agency that's sending out the hotspots to make sure their like Wi-Fi passwords were the same and things like that so that it made it easier for you to connect your software to their hotspots?
We didn't do so much that, though we do find out that the same hotspots that they are using are the same hotspots that we have. What we were first and foremost wanting to do is to let them know that there are other learners in that household that may need that hotspot. That includes the adult learner who is charged with helping their children log on for classes. And that conversation started before us. So when we heard that they were making this effort, I was pretty vigilant and persistent in getting into that conversation. And we have bi-weekly conversations about how we can align our services without duplication. And they were very appreciative that we brought in this perspective and that we can be a resource for them. So this is also a way that we get referred new learners. When they find a parent who might need some help, they can send them to us and they can go to our parent literacy classes or our digital literacy classes to be able to upgrade their skill. But as far as the actual same passwords, we just need to know how to access that and then create a more smooth pathway. We did find that since they already have some IT support, that there's ways to be able to access that expertise since they already paid for it without us paying for it. We just have to be very specific in our request, and we put together a list of the types of questions that we're likely to ask, and I'll be presenting that to that group at our next meeting.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Robin, have you got a question from folks?
Yeah, yes, I do. I'm going to start with, we had a comment about not wanting, someone who said if you were to ask them to use their birth date, that would be, no issues that I'm out. It's not something they'd be willing to do. And I think that's among for a lot of people, that might be an issue. So if you could address that. And then also, I happen to think myself too, when we have refugees who don't know their birth date and then they're randomly assigned that, birth date of January 1st, and they guess on a year, whether you have any, whether you end up with sometimes people with similar names, and how you handle that sort of thing, similar names and similar birth dates.
Sure. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that the principle's understood and then applied to the practice. And the principle is use a consistent naming convention. We just happened to use this one because it was working for us. And we didn't have anyone who was objecting from using birth dates because at the point of intake, that was what we were using and we needed to have their name. And it was something that was a common question that we would ask, and we would get a pretty close approximation of that answer. Yes, we do have sometimes where people do not know their birthdays or they have a different birthday, and we learn that over time, but at least we know what we're shooting for. Now, if there is a specific objection to using a birthday, then, and it's broad enough in your population, pick a different naming convention. But the key is to be consistent in whatever naming convention that you have, so that you're not having to look up 50 different versions of a username or a password.
Great answer. Thank you.
Great. Michael, you mentioned that the Chromebooks didn't work for all aspects of your program. Can you talk about what some of the issues were for around the Chromebooks?
Yes. So a lot of the Chromebooks, especially those that were coming from other agencies, they were loaded and configured for a specific learning application and not necessarily all of ours. And the ability to download new things, not necessarily those that are accessible exclusively through the web, but proprietary learning type software, was a little bit challenging. That being said, we do have some guides that we're putting together for Chromebooks, and we went through the step-by-step process and it is physically possible to be able to do things from testing to logging on to some programs. We just found that we had a little bit of a struggle with it initially in comparison to the laptops that were configured from the beginning for our adult learner. So we just work with every device and try to work our way through it. And then once we have a solution that we feel confident in, build a visual guide and make that the practice so that people aren't struggling through and hitting the same roadblocks that we do.
Perfect. Robin, you're up.
Michael, we've had a couple of questions about TeamViewer. You really, I think, piqued people's interest with that one. We had a question about whether, you can use it with iPads, iPhones, and Fire tablets. Also, folks would like to know whether you could confirm that the TeamViewer needs to be installed on both the students and the teacher's laptop.
We install it on both of our devices, and this is something that we're using for our devices that we started with. So we started with using PCs that we knew this would work on. Our operations manager, her name is Jessie, and she is wonderful. She can talk more specifically about what does TeamViewer translate to a Mac, which we would like to be able to do, or to an Android device and others. But we started with this because these were the devices that we were providing. And in order to be able to use TeamViewer, you still have to download it. So if it's in their house and they haven't connected to the internet, to connect to the internet, then download TeamViewer seems like a backward step. So it's just one of the things that we're trying to figure out is, can we get that loaded more efficiently? Because once you have it, then you can more quickly reconfigure their devices or show them how to go through each step of the way. So that's something that we can look at more carefully, but we were just trying to find the shortest path. And we knew TeamViewer, which is free, works on our laptops, which we load on ours in each of our home offices, and we load it on every laptop that we put into our fleet.
Perfect. Michael, we actually had a couple of requests for you to go back to the 7 skills slide. Would you mind putting that up? And then I have another question about your
Yay, here they are, the 7 skills. We talked about this quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful for people to see, and to see that they're not like, they don't require extensive digital knowledge. Like you said, I think you mentioned that a lot of your volunteers and students were already able to do like 4 or 5 of them already. So it's not a big leap to get to all 7.
Yes, and the thing is to make it so that it's a finite list and it's accessible, so we're not asking them to be able to do what a Navigator does with those step-by-step guides. We're just saying, if you can do this, you can be a virtual tutor. And then that awakens with them a little bit of courage to say, well, maybe I will try this. Especially, we find a lot of pride, or have great pride, when we have someone who, by their own admission, says that they were technophobic and scared of technology, and now they're virtual tutors with a high level of proficiency and confidence. But these are the 7 skills, and our tutor checkups, we demonstrate it. So here's how you teach this lesson, and here's how you use the annotate tool. The last week's session was just about that, going over these 7 skills and showing how you can apply them to a Challenger 2 lesson, which I think is great.
And I would just add too, if you're not getting every bit of this written down, don't worry about it, because on Monday you're going to receive a copy of the presentation and you're going to have access to all this. So don't worry if you can't get it all this great information written down right now.
Correct.
We found by having these skills, then you can start to recruit a different type of volunteer that says, maybe you want to lead with this. And zip codes don't matter. So we have volunteers from all over the place: Pennsylvania, Arizona, Florida, California. And over the summer, we even had a volunteer from Australia. Just because they're not in our area doesn't mean that they can't help.
Fantastic. We have a series of questions about your laptop loan program. So I'm going to kind of work my way through those. So we're going to start off with what are the terms and conditions for the laptop program?
Those are evolving. So the original one was we sent a letter that says this is the laptop and is for your educational purposes, and for as long as that you are actively pursuing your academic goal, you can have this laptop. You're responsible for this laptop, and when you're done, you need to turn it in. What we found is that our learners, even when we have an in-person capability, more than likely this is going to be a support that is helpful to them. So we can do blended learning. So we've had to revise it to say it's not just for virtual learning. So if you have an in-person tutor session, you still can have this laptop. So it's a longer term loaning as opposed to short term. But it is stated up front that this is our equipment and that they are responsible for the care of the equipment. And at the end of their academic service, they are required to turn it in, or I'm required to pick it up. I don't mind driving around to pick up our equipment, because when we have that device returned, we could repurpose it and put it in the hands of another person.
Perfect. And then this kind of goes along with that, Michael, is how do you keep just track of all the laptops that you've sent out? How do you ensure that you get them back? You kind of talked to that. And what's your kind of rate of return for computers getting like returned back to you?
Well, the rate of return is very low. Once you get connected and you see that it's useful, it's not just useful for learning, it's useful for other things. And we're not in your homes, and we're not here to police what you do with it. So once a learner becomes proficient, they are likely to keep it. We do have on Google Docs a pretty sophisticated spreadsheet that says this learner has this laptop. We have a laptop number with their TeamViewer number right in the same line. So if someone is trying to see what they need to do to support that particular learner and that laptop, it's all there. We have the date that the laptop was requested, the date that it was delivered or sent to through the postal service, and the date that it was activated. So we want to make sure that we have a tracking system from the time that they request until the time that they turn it on. And when they turn it back over again, we take their names off of it and repurpose it for another learner. That's all managed on Google Docs, and we check that on a daily basis. Sometimes it's not as frequent when we know that we're not putting out new laptops, but since we started this, it's a pretty consistent thing. Occasionally we do have returns based off of a technical issue, and rather than having them struggle, we just say, give us back the laptop. We take it over to our computer science extraordinaire student, and he says, oh, we had to do this one thing. I feel like an idiot, but I'm glad that we're not asking our students to figure it out. And once it's clear for service, we put it back into the fleet.
Okay. And are you finding when it's time when the student is ready to move on to like a community college or something else, their learning with Kalamazoo Literacy Council is over, are you able to get all of those laptops back? Have you had anybody that hasn't returned one, or they've been damaged or anything like that?
We haven't had damage, and because we have good relationships, remember, because we have navigators who are building relationships and trust, there's very little of an expectation or behavior that shows that I'm trying to take this laptop and misuse it. We've had some learners who have moved, and before they've moved, because we know that they're moving, we make arrangements to either have them drop off the laptop or us pick up the laptop, and we haven't lost any yet. We did have one circumstance where there was a refugee who kind of misunderstood what community services were and was trying to say, because I am a refugee, I am entitled to this laptop. After a series of conversations, we convinced him otherwise, so that he agrees in the same way that we see it. So it's just about relationships and managing expectations and being consistent in your approach for how you administer a program like this.
Excellent. And then one more question, and then I'll let Robin ask some more. One more question about the laptop. Do you carry any insurance on your equipment that you send out?
No, we didn't add any additional insurance. And this was one of those things that, because of how quickly we built it, we had a pretty high understanding that the equipment that we built should probably work within warranty. And when you send if you're using the postal service, there's already some equipment some insurance that's insuring the packages up to a point. So we didn't see that this was an immediate issue in terms of replacement or from an insurance perspective. It is something that as we look further down the road, we might want to consider, but at this point, it wasn't an immediate concern. Access was the immediate concern. And I think that sometimes when building a system, we might overthink things to the point where it slows down the innovation that's necessary to rapidly respond. So we're catching up to that part. But at this point, we haven't put any additional insurance on these devices.
Perfect. Let me just kind of remind people that we are coming to the top of the hour. So to thank folks for joining us, and you know, you are free to leave, but Michael has agreed to stick around and make sure everybody's questions get answered. So we're going to ask at the top of the hour, we're going to cut off additional questions. But if you'd like to stick around and just hear the answers to your questions, you're welcome to do that. We'll probably be another 10 or 15 minutes after the top of the hour. But I just wanted to say again, thank you all for coming. Remind you that you'll get a follow-up email, and to say thank you to Michael, and then we'll get back to answering folks' questions. So Robin, do you have another one?
Sure do. Michael, Marcia would like to know how reliable Cisco WebEx is. She said she didn't add it to her computer because she saw it was not particularly well rated. So.
Yes, well, we haven't had any major difficulties. I think in the beginning there was a question of volume of usage, so there might be a little bit of difficulty or lag in logging on, but currently we don't have any problems. And they did catch up a little bit. In the beginning, they didn't have breakout rooms like Zoom does, but now they do. So we found that it's on par with what we do with Zoom. And because a lot of our partners already had WebEx within their infrastructure, it made a lot of sense to use what was there as opposed to trying to purchase or secure something new. The other thing we like about it is there's no limitations that we have as far as you're going to get timed out after 45 minutes or something like that. So it's pretty stable, and we haven't seen that there's been any technical glitches that have made us have to go to a different platform.
And Michael, I'm going to take this opportunity to make a small plug for those of you who don't know. If you are using Zoom, that you can get discounted Zoom licenses through Pro Literacy, and I am placing a link for you to get more information about that. So that was just one of the things we know as people were kind of struggling to get up and going with virtual learning. Some people were using WebEx, some people were using Zoom, so we were trying to find a way to kind of ease that financial burden for people.
Yeah, we use what works. So we have WebEx, we have Zoom, some are using WhatsApp. They're using different devices. We just wanted to make sure that whatever's being used, we have the ability to support them by understanding all the technical requirements and the ins and outs of how to access the different features that they have.
Perfect. We do have kind of another question along the same lines. I'm going to ask it a little bit differently. This from Jeffrey, who says we use multiple platforms: Google Meet, Zoom, GoToMeeting, and WhatsApp. Do you have a sense of which video conferencing platform requires the least device resources? So like memory, processing power, data usage, those sorts of things. Have you found that especially if you're relying on students to use their mobile devices, that some software works better with those than others?
Just from a standpoint of observation, we haven't seen that there's been much of a difference. Now for data use, that comes down to what plan they have, not necessarily what application that they're using. So when our navigators are working with that, one of the things that we're trying to be better at is, if you're using your own internet, do you have the means of being able to get the right internet? So our financial literacy class, which we're terraforming specific to this, is how with your existing budget, you can secure better internet without actually having to expend overall more in your household budget. So it's just finding different ways and knowing the limitations of them. But we haven't seen that there's been any measurable difference between a WebEx or a Zoom. When you're using your mobile devices, it's dictated by the plan, the type of data plan that you have. Unlimited is awesome, but when it isn't, you need to be a little bit more efficient in that.
Perfect.
Michael, could you speak about building relationships, specifically with your county or with other schools and organizations in your area?
Yes, and again, I think at the beginning of this, I was saying that solving this as a community issue instead of an agency issue, and we see this as an infrastructure issue, and by no means should a literacy council be responsible for building the infrastructure required for a virtual learning network for adult learners. So we have something called the Adult Literacy Collaborative. It's a monthly meeting of partners that we've been purposefully working with to align services. And we use that as the primary means of connecting to our adult eds, our ESL providers, libraries, Michigan Works, homeless shelters, and other places where our learners are likely to frequent. And each of those partners, they have unique capabilities. And as you develop those partnerships, you can see who can do what best and utilize their expertise. So for example, in workforce development, we're not workforce development experts, but our Michigan Works Workforce Development Agency is. Their career coaches and career navigators are present as instructors for our workforce development program that we call JOBS. Same thing with Goodwill Industries. They have a workforce development expertise. So you find the expertise you don't have, but you do need, and build a workable relationship with them. Usually that when you do this, if it's mutually beneficial, you can find that it's sustainable because you're not necessarily having to spend more money. You're just trying to align it so that you use the existing resources more purposefully toward a common goal. So in our community, we took the lead voice of aligning these services and connecting them to bigger resources that we have in our community, such as that digital access for all. There was a regionalization effort that our former governor had. We were able to align resources and get financial support to build some of this virtual network simply because we were working together. So each partnership is a negotiated relationship of finding mutual interests, cultivating it, and then getting some programs on the ground. 15 literacy centers we have across Kalamazoo County, all by different partners, and we are not paying rent in those spaces. We have a mutual agreement that literacy and adult learning services should be provided in these churches and other places where we've established them.
Great. And we have another question about, you talked about your circle of support. There's just a question about, like, how does that take place? When does that take place? So at what point in the process are you starting to connect learners with all of these different resources that they may need to break down their barriers to learning? Does that happen right away, or can you talk a little bit more about that?
It happens right away at the point of intake. So you're familiar with an adult learning plan, which itself is a document, but we spend a lot more time in having what we call adult learning plan interviews. So you're actually having that intentional conversation of establishing the goal, establishing barriers, and creating a plan that you can act upon with the learners so that they have their goals and they have steps that they can take in partnership with the navigator that's supporting them. We do this at the point of intake, and it is an episodic adventure where they continue to follow up with them on a weekly basis, working on assigned tasks and working through barrier to barrier. And we looked at it from a standpoint of, this is something that we partnered with Goodwill Industries and our Kalamazoo Adult Education to develop a formal structure for how you train people to connect these community resources around the needs of adult learners. So we've been providing that workshop on a consistent basis to be able to make sure that there's a consistent approach to removing barriers to learning. There's 8 specific strategies that we train upon, and that's been able to reduce a lot of the tensions that we have and increase retention rates for our learner population because of this training that we have.
Thank you.
So my coworker was barking a little bit, so Todd, stop me if I end up asking a question that's already been asked here. A couple more quick questions about TeamViewer. One, can you change computer settings from your end if a student's struggling with that? Can somebody jump in and take care of it? And also, who is running it on your end? Is it the teacher? Every teacher knows how to do this and they're all handling it. Who takes care of that?
We'll start with the backwards on this question. Our navigators are the ones who do it. We want our tutors and instructors to be tutors and instructors first. So if we take care of this part, they can focus on instruction. Now, as far as what TeamViewer can actually do, I check with our operations manager and the navigators who do this most in terms of can you change settings. But what it's really designed to do is that, I mean, you take over the computer and you're doing what they would do on that computer. So you can work with their Wi-Fi, you can configure the computer to be able to do what it needs to be done. We just use it that way because it takes some of the frustration out, but you have to get through that first barrier first of getting it connected through Wi-Fi so you can access the device through TeamViewer. And TeamViewer, if you load it a certain way, that should start right away, so you don't have to take that extra step of trying to figure out how to get it started. But that's more of the technical parts, and if someone wants to go through the technical guide with that later, we can probably connect you to our people who do that best. My job is to make sure it's available and listen to them. Their job is to test it and until they break it, and then when they break it, find a solution for it.
Great. There was a quick question about, let's see, where did it go? Oh, so there's a question about, all of your virtual tutors are volunteers. Is that correct?
Vast majority of them. We have 3 ESL instructors that are contracted to provide the ESL classes, but everything else, volunteers. Writing class, volunteer. Computer class, volunteer. Citizenship, volunteer. So we train our volunteers, and what we look for is what is the upper threshold of their ability to teach. And that upper threshold is in your ability to train and support. So what we've been able to find is that they're quite proficient if you train and support them well. And we just add the tutor checkups to be able to increase their virtual tutor capability.
And so is there a reason why you have paid teachers working with your ESL students and volunteers working with the others? Have you found that there's like a skill differential between the paid and the volunteer that's needed to work with ESL students in a virtual environment, or that's just kind of the way your program was structured to begin with and it shifted over?
That part of our program is structured underneath the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So there are requirements and guidelines that require that we have a professional level of expertise within that area. You can find a very highly skilled tutor who can, with the proper support, have measurable skill gains that are on par with what an ESL instructor does. But the biggest thing is because of the ratio. When you're working one-to-one and properly trained, you have the capability of being able to achieve those measurable skills gains on pace. But the TESOL certified or certified instructors, they are particularly qualified in working level by level to help our learners to progress more consistently from level to level. So we have both, but we rely, we say we're volunteer-led, staff-supported. This is the staff side that is essential for maintaining the level of academic quality, supported by volunteers who can enhance that academic quality.
Perfect. We've got a few more questions. Robin, you got another one?
Sure. So kind of a two-parter here. One, is there a shareable guide presentation on virtual volunteer training? And then also, do you ever work with any other literacy councils to help them get up and running virtually?
Well, we do have it's kind of like an orientation for being a virtual tutor. And we keep on revising it as we have new knowledge. And occasionally I have consulted with some literacy councils. The last one was in one of the Detroit area. They heard us on a call like this and said, can you come and talk to us? I said, sure. So we've been sharing expertise in that fashion. And in our state, there's a great collaboration among adult education providers where they're sharing information all the time. So it just comes down to who is the person who you want to get, or the agency you want to get your expertise from. Probably those who are working on it locally, because you can grow that expertise together as opposed to calling for help from 3 states or 7 states away, where the customization of local practice just simply isn't there.
Perfect. We've got 3 more questions. I think I'll just kind of run through those real quick. So one is for Stephanie. Did you say do you charge your adult learners for their learning materials and things like that?
No, it's all free. We want every barrier to learning to be removed, and we certainly do not want to have a financial cost for our learners.
Okay, so all free. Who is paying? Can you review again who pays for the ongoing monthly subscription for the hotspots?
Well, what we ended up doing is looking at our budget of what we currently spend. There's some things that we're not paying for anymore. Are we paying for food anymore? No, because we're not meeting anymore. Do we pay for transportation support anymore? No. So we reallocated those funds toward digital devices and upkeep. And we have a really good relationship with our local philanthropic community. Every single one of them asked, what type of help do you need in order to be able to continue to provide service? So do you have to change your grants in order to be able to survive this COVID-19, or what can we do to help? And we told them that what our current project is for virtual learning, and we were able to secure some funds to be able to provide for the ongoing upkeep of our Wi-Fi hotspots. That is one area that I'm not trying to expand. That's why I went after this digital access for all, because they have all these hotspots, and if they're in the same homes that we are, why would we try to buy hotspots that are already been paid for by an institution that has a lot more financial capacity than we do? Mm-hmm. So it's an ongoing process, but we had to do our part, and we figured that our buy-in was to secure a limited number of hotspots and a predictable number of laptops to be able to join this broader community effort to bridge the digital divide.
Excellent. And our last question, do you use Learning Upgrade for other teaching besides digital literacy?
Yes, we do, but because Learning Upgrade is very great, the idea that they can learn when we're not there. But what we ended up using for the digital literacy for is because we wanted to be able to teach digital literacy to a broad range of learners without having to customize a lot of curriculum. And since it was already built in with something like 60 different digital activities, it just made a lot more sense. And then we had a brave volunteer who said, I'll try it. We said, sure, we'll train you. So that's how we started with that. But we do have learners that are using it for other purposes as well.
That makes sense.
Todd, can we squeeze in one more question that came in after the hour? Michael, could you share would you be willing to share the orientation for virtual tutors?
Sure, but I have to make sure what version that we're in, because every time we do this, we have to change this because we learn new things. So what I talk about by localized or customized around local supports, when it says call your friendly connector, most organizations would know what a friendly connector is. In our case, that is a veteran volunteer who's supposed to be your mentor to help you through the system. So we'd have to look at it to see how relevant it is outside of our unique Kalamazoo Literacy Council language. But if it is something like that, we can certainly make that available along with this PowerPoint.
I think that'd be fantastic, Michael. And I think even if some things aren't relevant, I think for a lot of times for people, it's just helpful to have a framework of, oh, these are the types of topics and things like that that need to get covered to make somebody feel comfortable. So even if the way that they would be addressed in their local literacy program is different or quite different, kind of seeing what those larger target areas are for the virtual orientation or the orientation for virtual tutors is really helpful for people.
Yes, I certainly understand the appeal of having a starting point, but I will also encourage you, I'll say no one's a better expert of who you are other than you. So look to what you know and then start building to it. And as you come across these better practices or best practices, remember they're not best practices until they're the best practice for you. So that customization is very important. And oftentimes it just feels like you're trying to change somebody else's model into what you're doing. So just
Mhm.
be purposeful about what you're looking for. And the learning process to me is actually the exciting part. When you figure it out, it fits you perfectly, as opposed to fitting someplace that's 7 states away that has a totally different infrastructure for providing adult learning.
Yeah, and Michael, I think actually that's a good comment to wind up on. I think a lot of what you've talked about today can be summarized with the phrase of be purposeful in what you're doing. I think you have in the materials you've shown, the content you've shown us today, you've kind of exhibited what that purposefulness looks like when trying to solve a specific problem or issue. So let me just say again, thank you, Michael, for sharing your time and your knowledge and your experience with us. And thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar. As we said, we are recording it. You'll get a follow-up email on Monday with all of the resources that we've talked about, a recording, those sorts of things. And then keep your eyes out for future webinars from us.
And I'd like to thank everyone who is listening, and also the incredible team we have at the KLC. Our navigators are wonderful, and our operations manager, she keeps all of our technology and infrastructure in line. We have a supportive board and an incredible marketing development coordinator who makes sure that our message is available and present in our community. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks,
All right.
Michael. I wrote down your quote about best practices. I'm sure we're going to be able to use that somewhere.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.